Hey guys, it's Liv here. In today's video, we're going to be ranking every single Pokemon legal in VGC Series 2. And if you guys enjoy this and you want to see some more content like it, like and subscribe, and answer the comment question of the day, what Pokemon do you think you were the most wrong about going into VGC Series 2? For me, honestly, this might be a bit of a hot take, but I think it was Palafin. Palafin has been a fucking nightmare in this format, and it's been a really deadly Pokemon. I definitely under-tier this one. I think there's a couple others I can mention too, like Lamora, for example, Spathra, Baxcalibur, etc. But let me know your answers down below. I'd love to hear what you guys ended up thinking would have been better or worse in this format. And with that said, let's get started. So obviously, as I did mention, we have actually already done this tier list before. However, I wanted to do this one yet again because of the fact that my opinions on the format clearly have changed since the last time I've done this. The last time I did this format was a few days into playing it. I had done like just finishing my first Orlando regional. Now I've done content on this format for about like 40 something days. On top of it as well, we've had several regional results that I can go off of for just trying to figure out, did stuff do well or did it not do well? So that's kind of what we want to do today, is we want to figure out, did stuff do well, did stuff not do well? We've already kind of went over in the previous tier list, you know, what the initial thoughts going into the format were, so that when you guys could use this as a resource. Think of this one as more so like a closing of the door to try and see what ended up holding up, and as well to give you guys a little bit of a prelude into what might be worthwhile doing Series 3. I don't want to do the Series 3 tier list just yet. I want to give it a little bit like with the Series 2 tier list, to where we can play a little bit of the format first, and 5 games on Unranked Ladder, well, 5 sets of videos on Unranked Ladder, I should say, isn't really enough for me to make that confidence. So this one might still have a lot that can help you, since a lot of these Pokemon will be legal. It's just going to add in 4 new ones. So hopefully just a lot of this video ends up being helpful for you guys. With that said though, let's get started. So this S+ tier is essentially going to be for Pokemon that genuinely are like the top 5 or so in the format. This is going to be a lot more like actual numerically based, because unlike the type tier list where, for example, with bug type, obviously not any of the bug types fit that qualification, so we can actually do a lot more of an objective ranking here. So the S+ is going to be for like truly top 5 of the format type mons. The S tier is going to be for Pokemon that are still really strong picks. You're going to see these on a majority of teams fighting in the ladder. A tiers are going to be for Pokemon that you're going to fight at least on about half the teams in the ladder. And they're still not only on the ladder, but also in tournament play. This all includes tournament play as well, showdown usage, in-game usage, etc. You'd expect these at least like a coin toss if you fight it or not in any given session of games. B tier is going to be for Pokemon. You'll probably end up fighting these an okay amount. There's stuff you should still be kind of prepared for, at least acknowledge that you shouldn't be very weak to these Pokemon, but they're not stuff you'd fight on every team. And the C tier is going to be for Pokemon that truly do fill a metagame niche. These are for things like, for example, if I was to look at Fluttermane counter, if there was a really good Fluttermane counter, but it was not really being used, that might be something that gets C tier. Or maybe for some sort of really good haze gimmick that can just beat Dondozo, like Vaporeon, for example. I'll mention that right now. Vaporeon would probably be a C tier mon. It has a good gimmick against Dondozo. It has a niche matchup there, but it's not really consistently great. D tier is going to be for picks that essentially you would probably only be using these if you're trying to either A, use your favorite mon, or B, if it's a content creator team. But that's really about it. The E tier is going to be for Pokemon that, at the very least, they're noteworthy enough to mention why they suck, but they're not really good mons. And the F tier is going to be for Pokemon that are so bad, but they're either fully evolved, or they're at least NFE and noteworthy enough compared to that fully evolved pool that sucks. But with that said though, let's get into all of the mons today. So, Raichu. Looking on my tier list from the Series 2 beginning of the format, I believe I put Raichu in the D tier, I want to say. I'm pretty sure this is a mon. Yeah, I put it in the D tier. And I can't lie, I think that was actually a pretty good call. Raichu's not a bad fake out user. Obviously, Lightning Rod is an amazing ability. However, at the same time, though, Lightning Rod Raichu definitely is just outclassed. There's a lot better fake out mons in this format. Even as far as fake out electric types go, we have mons like Palmot, for example, which just do the job significantly better. Raichu's okay, though. I think I remember it doing somewhat okay at an event this format, but even still, I mean, Raichu isn't exactly going to be getting a ton of usage. It's 91 overall on the in-game ladder. As far as tournament usage goes, we can actually pull that up, though I guess actually it's not coming up. Oh, never mind. Here we go. Raichu. Here we go. So Raichu did not get usage for Bochum. It did not get much usage for Noxil. Yeah, it's not really getting used a lot, but I think that's kind of fine. This thing is objectively just kind of a niche fake out user, and that's really that. Wigglytuff sucks. For any of the F tiers, by the way, I spent way too long in the F tiers last time. If it's not at least going to be a Pokemon that's in the E tier, I'm not going to discuss why it's there. Just know that it's really unusable. Venomoth. sucks. Doug Trio sucks. Persian, E tier. Persian's actually kind of good. Actually, yeah, I'm gonna give Persian E tier. I was gonna say maybe maybe D tier, but no, Persian with Technician Fake Out is E tier enough. Just the fact that it's a normal type that has Technician boosted Fake Out, it's probably one of the stronger Fake Outs you can get, I guess, but it's still not that strong considering the fact that Persian has pretty weak offenses. But the fact that you have a normal typing with Stab as Fake Out is kind of cool. Also, if we were to look at Persian's move pool this generation, you get some okay options for support, stuff like Foul Play, for example, Switcheroo, Taunt, Thunder Wave. You can make Persian kind of work, but this is a mon that you choose to use, not the fact that your team should run this mon, if that makes sense. And that's kind of really what the motto for the E tier is. Golduck. Golduck actually is not bad. I would give Golduck a D tier. I definitely think that I got this one right as well in the last tier list. But essentially, Golduck is just meant to be a pretty okay option on Rain. There's a lot of better Rain sweepers, and I think that Rain has truly shifted away from a Swiss Swim format to a team that's just focused on offense, which for what it's worth, I guess besides it's a couple Sun picks, that's also the case for literally every weather. Because there's literally just like Lilligant and I guess kind of Fluttermane and Roaring Moon that actually care about that speed from Sun, and otherwise weather teams just don't really care about the weather speed boosting abilities this gen, which is fine. That's honestly probably better for them because, for example, Halo's running Bundle, it's not running Titan. If we're talking about Sand, it's running Houndstone, but that's because Sand doesn't benefit anything else unless it's solo T-Tar counts as Sand now. But Sand doesn't really actually, you don't run Sand teams this gen unless it's like some really shitty like a Houndstone last respect Sand team. Though I guess for what it's worth, Lycanroc is actually probably the best thing in Sand. Sand is an exception. Sun runs a lot more like a Torkoal Trick oriented stuff, or it's just with stuff like Great Tusk, for example, but it's meant to focus on offense. And then Rain is mostly Palafin focused right now. No one's really running any other Rain sweeper because Palafin is just usurping like all of the Rain usage right now. But Golduck's fine enough. It's an okay Terramon. It's an okay just Pokemon in general. Definite D tier. Primeape gets an E tier. A Violet Primeape alone with Define is a good enough reason to justify its E tier placement, but it's still not that good of a mon for sure. It kind of sucks, but it's like objectively a fine pick. Overall though, this is definitely like an E tier. Really, it's just shitty Annihilate, but Annihilate is just so fucking good that why run the shitty Annihilate? Arcanine. Arcanine I gave initially an S tier in the first tier list. I might have actually bumped that up at the end of it to an S+. No, I actually kept that as an S tier. I kind of stand by that, in all honesty. I think Arcanine just is an S tier mon. For what it's worth, I think I mentioned then that I could have seen Arcanine hitting like an S+ tier usage or S+ tier tiering, and I don't really stand by that as much now. For what it's worth, Arcanine is still an amazing Intimidator, but with stuff like, for example, Great Tusk propping up in the metagame, and Kingambit now just honestly just muscling past Arcanine, or just Lumberry being fairly common. Well, not fairly common, but it's a common enough item. People are playing around Arcanine pretty well. It still is a general pretty good blanket mon, and truthfully, it is probably one of the best S tiers that we have. However, I think that Arcanine, it's a mon that is really best used for its ability. You don't really need Arcanine for much else outside of like Helping Hand and Snarl support, I guess, or Will-O-Wisp occasionally. But the meta has adapted around a lot of how Arcanine does play. And that's not to say that Arcanine is bad. It's still one of the best mons you can get. It's the best Intimidator by a long shot. But Arcanine, I think, is a lot easier to play around now than it would be in like the beginning of the format. We're seeing a lot of teams running more stuff like Palafin, Great Tusk, etc. And these are really bad mons for Arcanine because they both force it into Terra. And if you're really going to Terra Arcanine, while it's not a terrible Terra option, it's fine enough by all means. At the same time, though, you're typically having a lot of better options on most of your teams, and Arcanine is usually at best like a third or fourth best Terra option if you were lucky. Usually though, it's like the worst Terra option on your team, or like one of the worst in my opinion. Still a really strong mon overall, but definitely it is lackluster compared to a lot of the other S pluses at least, so I'm gonna give it just a really strong S tier. Slowbro I guess has enough of a merit being like a Oblivious Triggermon. We'll give it E tier just because of Oblivious Triggermon, I guess. It's probably worse than Slowking in this format for what it's worth, because I think that Slowking could probably be a little bit of a better Terra option to make that work, but even still, they're both kind of shit this gen. Magneton, it's noteworthy enough just because of the fact that it's slightly faster than Magnezone, but Magnezone's already kind of shit, so Magneton is also still pretty shit. Muck, I kind of want to put Muck in the E tier, I can't lie, but it still is kind of bad. Really, the only way you're making Muck work is like with the minimized sets, but Muck can't really do that because Muck just kind of fucking sucks. I wish Muck was better, I really do. A lower Muck would have made a solid C tier, maybe even a B tier, but nah, regular Muck is just kind of shit. F tier. Cloister. Cloister's also kind of shit. F tier, Gengar. Gengar's not bad. Gengar, I think I definitely over-tiered this in the last tier list. I forget where I tiered it, but I'm pretty sure. Oh, actually, I give it C tier? That's actually where I was going to put it this time. I can't lie. Maybe I was on top of my game with Gengar. But this is a pretty decent, okay option. It's for one, it's an offensive ghost that can pressure both of Fluttermane's Terra Stabs, which is kind of a nice niche actually to have. If you were to throw this in Tailwind, it would have a niche of maybe going for like a Terra Poison set or like a Terra Dark set or some sort of like bulky Terra that could maybe get around Fluttermane. You still get Perish Song, you still get stuff like Icy Wind support. Though one of the benefits that you get on this that you don't get on Fluttermane, if I remember correctly, is yeah, so I'm pretty sure Gengar still gets Will-O-Wisp, which is something that Fluttermane actually does not get. It's a really, really specific thing that Gengar actually does get that Fluttermane doesn't, because otherwise they basically do have the same sort of support move pools. For example, they both get Perish Song. I think that Fluttermane also actually lacks Haze, which is another thing that Gengar gets. Yeah, so Gengar also gets Haze, which is actually kind of cool. But overall, I mean, Gengar still is kind of just a shitty Fluttermane, though it has the roll compression of something like a Murkrow as well, to where you can kind of make this thing work as like a good Icy Wind support mon. But it's really just like a hyper-specific set of roll compression that I don't think a majority of teams need. In fact, I would argue that almost no team actually needs Gengar's roll suppression, but it has a lot of really valuable tools going for it, to where in closed sheet at least, I think this might have merit. In tournament play though, I think this thing would bomb, but in closed sheet, you could probably justify this mon in my opinion. Hypno, shit. Electrode, not so much. This thing actually did pretty well at a regional. This made day 2 at Knoxville, if I remember correctly, which is kind of fucking insane. I never would have thought that I would have seen Electrode do well, but it does have an actual legitimate niche. For one, Electrode being able to Choice Scarf outpace everything in the format, including other booster energy Pokemon, is kind of fucking insane. You can get stuff like, for example, the one at Knoxville actually ran Scarf Scary Face, which is a pretty good way of speed control. You also could go with stuff like Thunder Wave, though. This set has Terra Blast, Grass, Volt Switch, Thunderbolt, and Scary Face. And it's a pretty good idea. You could use Electrode as a really strong, really fast Scary Face option to drop speed by 2, which is useful. But you could also essentially play this as a Hisuian Electrode with the Electric Grass Stabs, which is pretty decent, actually. I'm actually inclined almost to give this thing a D tier. I think Electrode kind of proved itself this gen. I don't want to give this thing too much credit, though, because it still is an Electrode, but I think the fact that it was able to make day 2, on top of the fact that its niche is actually very unique and nothing can do the niche better outside of Prankster Pokemon, which even still Prankster mons have their issue against Dark types being able to priority drop their speed, I would argue that this thing actually has its own niche. Like, Electrode truly is kind of the best at its job, if that makes sense, but its job is a very specific one that most teams don't really need, and I think it's a kind of a case where the person that ran Electrode wanted to run Electrode. It wasn't a thing that they could have necessarily forced into a team, but I'll acknowledge it has merit here, and I think it supports the team that they brought very well. So we'll give it D tier. I think Electrode has actually kind of grown on me. Randy, if you're watching this, I'm gonna kill you if you said that Electrode's better than Bolt. I'm gonna kill you. But D tier for sure. I think it's a fine mon. Chansey, Violate, it's the only reason it's getting F tier. Typing plus Technician is the only reason it's getting mentioned in this list. Base Tauros gets F tier. Blaze Tauros gets a C tier, and Aqua Tauros gets a B tier. Regular Tauros is just an opportunity cost, to be completely honest, but it's good among the typing at the very least. As far as the Blaze Tauros goes, Blaze Tauros is a nice merit of being neutral fairy, which is something that Water would have to tear around to do. But Water Tauros, I think, is ultimately going to be better in majority of cases, considering the fact that Water Tauros obviously does have the benefit of being a really strong Rain Intimidate option. You could go with stuff like Aqua Jet, for example, as priority, while still going with Intimidate, and Mirror Herb especially is also really good on that for random setup options that might set up before you. This allows Tauros to be an actually really damning offensive bet for teams. And with stuff like Wave Crash as well being boosted by Rain, this has some merit, actually, in my opinion. I would say that there are actually teams that might consider running this mon over Palafin, especially with stuff like Raging Bull being a pretty valuable offensive option, since it can break screens for teams, which is useful, I guess, for certain archetypes. I think, though, the meta has shifted away from Paldean Tauros for sure. It's no longer really getting the usage like it was in previous formats, and I think for good reason. It's a lot more power crept this time around than it was in Series 1, but I think it's not a bad mon still. Blaze Tauros is just Paldean Tauros, but slightly worse. B and C tier, respectively. Gyarados. Gyarados is kind of whatever, but it's a fine enough mon. I think I'm going to drop this thing to C tier. I had it in B tier on my initial tier list. However, I think it's so much worse than Arcanine that I can't really justify the B tier. I will say though that this thing actually did pretty well at Vancouver. In May Day 2, actually, there was a player who got, I believe it was 28th seed. No, it was, I forgot what seed. Yeah. So Cali Peacock, they ended up getting the 28th overall on day 1 and then 32 overall in day 2. They ran Gyarados with Tinkaton, Baxcalibur, Iron Valiant, Masquerada, and Armarouge, which is pretty fucking cool. I'm glad to see that Gyarados did make a day 2 because I had a lot of faith in it, and I still do have faith in it. It was a decent helping hand plus Intimidate Mon, with also Thunder Wave support, which is unique from something like Arcanine. That's what the set ended up running in particular anyway. Terra Blast DD is still pretty good. It's typing with Terra Flying plus Water as a primary stab anyway. Does really well in a lot of matchups, and it's a Water type offensive threat that can actually naturally pressure Amoonguss with just a Terra Blast. So I gotta give it the C tier. This might move up to B, but I think for now I'm gonna keep it C. Vaporeon, I think also gets a C tier. It's a niche. It's a niche counter to Dondozo. Obviously, with Water Absorb plus Haze, you can actually use this thing as kind of a threat to Dozo, which is pretty cool. On top of that as well, it's just generally bulky. You have good enough stats where you could actually take advantage of something like a Terrifier. And function essentially is just a shitty Gastrodon. But I do think a Gastrodon is overall going to be majority better. It matches up better into most Dozo Terra types. It's just got native recover versus Gastrodon, versus Vaporeon having to rely on Wish. Though I would argue that Wish is kind of fine on Vaporeon. It just takes the move slot out is all. Because essentially what you need to do if you're going to go with Wish Vaporeon is you need to go with something like Wish, Protect, Haze, and then what's your fourth move? Gastrodon doesn't need to worry about that because it just goes for Recover, Clear Smog, Earth Power, and Ice Beam, and it kind of just handles every single Dozo to begin with. So we're going to give this thing C tier for sure. Jolteon honestly can fucking get an F tier. This mon is so bad. Flareon can get an E tier just because of Guts, Trick Room, and that Terra Normal with Facade, and that's really about it. Dragonite's an S tier. Dragonite proved itself very much so this format. Dragonite with Terra Blast Flying is an incredible threat. On top of this as well, it's a really good multi-scale user as well as a really good Intimidate user. Stuff with the Choice Band, Lumberry, Assault Vest, all have been prolific sets this format, and especially with the Ice Spinner Dragonite especially being a phenomenal partner for teams that were really weak to Ice Spam Trick Room, it's proven to be a pretty good threat in this format, and I think that Dragonite will continue to actually be a valuable Pokemon going into Series 3, where we're going to have partners like Qianpao, and even stuff like, for example, Ting Lu that could be decent defensive pieces with this. But overall, though, Dragonite is a Pokemon to be reckoned with. I think a lot of people just see Dragonite and think, oh, banded Terra Normal E-Speed, and I would like to argue, no, this thing has a lot more to it than that. I think it's a really strong offensive piece, and I think a lot of teams can fit this a lot more than would like to admit, because I do think it's a really tactical mon to use, but it's a really good mon at that at the very least, and I think that at the very least, any team that does consider this mon will have a very high amount of success going forward. Ampharos is shit, don't at me. Azumarill is an A tier. I still stand by this one actually. It's a great Perish mon, it's also a great just belly drum user. It's a little bit pressed for stuff like Amoonguss still being valuable in the format, but they've shifted away from Helmet being as common of an item just due to the fact that Pop Bomb Mousehold is no longer that common. And they've opted for more so like Citrus Berry, for example, which is pretty good for Azu at least, not having to take the redirection from Rage Powder plus the Rocky Helmet, of course. However, obviously, Azu still has to deal with power creep. It's a great belly drum mon, don't get me wrong. It can be a really good snowball for teams. It still is a really good AV threat, but I just think that Azu has a little bit of an issue with immediately being threatening. It's not to say it can't do a lot of damage, but I think there's a lot of options that just finally do outclass Azu for damage, so we're going to give it A tier. Sudowoodo shit. Jumpluff gets a D tier just off of Tailwind and the fact that it is kind of a niche option. I think it's some really unique support as far as Tailwind mons go, considering the fact that this thing also in tandem with Tailwind gets Reach Powder, which is pretty useful. It has a naturally high speed tier. You have a pretty okay typing, and with Terra, you can actually make this work. But really, it's just like between Tailwind, Encore, and Rage Powder, this thing's support is actually pretty obnoxious. You also get stuff like Sleep Powder, of course. You can essentially function like a Tailwind version of what Lilligant would otherwise do, while also getting Rage Powder. So we'll give Jumpluff D tier. Sunflora, I still think this thing has fate as actual use for what it's worth. Sunflora, it's kind of cool. This thing has nice Trick Room presence on the Sun. I don't exactly think this is a shit mon, so we're going to give it the E tier. Sunflora vid is actually coming up later this week. This thing is kind of a demon on Trick Room, I can't lie. It's unironically almost viable. Espeon. Espeon's also kind of shit. We're going to give this thing actually F tier. Umbreon gets a D tier, still a really good Snarlmon. Actually, I'm gonna give this thing C tier. Really good Snarlmon, really good support piece in general with stuff like Helping Hand. Obviously, you get Moonlight. At least I'm pretty sure you still get Moonlight. Moonlight might unironically be the thing that does or doesn't keep this thing in the yeah, it keeps Moonlight. I was gonna say that would be the thing that would keep it out of C tier if anything. Between stuff like Moonlight, Yawn, Helping Hand, Foul Play, Snarl, etc., you can make a lot of stuff work on Umbreon to where it kind of just does like the job of Arcanine but without Intimidate. So we'll give it the C tier for sure. Murkrow gets, honestly, Murkrow can get the A tier again. I mentioned in my previous tier lists for Series 2, and I do think that ended up actually being correct. Murkrow ended up honestly not performing well this gen. It's not to say that Murkrow never did well, but it's definitely a lot more lackluster than it was in Series 1, where Murkrow was one of the best Pokemon in the format. Now there's objectively better Tailwind monsters like Roaring Moon, Talonflame, even kind of Dragonite to an extent. Corviknight is a better Tailwind mon. I think I've even seen a Hydreigon, if I remember correctly, running Tailwind. I'm pretty sure that was Hydreigon. I know Jugulis actually also was running Tailwind, and yeah, Hydreigon was too. Point being is there's a lot of other Tailwind mons now, and they're opting for a lot more bulkier Tailwind options, or just fucking Talonflame. But overall, Murkrow's just not as good as it was. It's probably actually a weak A tier too. You could maybe even make a case for B tier. However, the Prankster Haze is unrivaled, truthfully, and it's a really valuable way around Dozo teams. So I'm going to give it A tier off of that alone, but that might skew down to B tier as the tier list goes on, because I've already tiered things a lot lower than I did previously. Speaking of lower, Slowking. Slowking gets an E tier. It's just slow, bro, but Spadef. I think it just matches up slightly better. Mischievous unironically actually also gets an E tier. This is a pretty cool Terramon. It's, if nothing else, just a cool Violate support thing. I think this thing actually is... Actually, no, I'm going to give it D tier. That might be a bit of a hot take. I think that Mischievous unironically is a pretty decent Trick Room setter. It's better than stuff like Slowbro and Slowking, so I want to give it a tier above. But essentially, though, this thing is a pretty sick Terramon. With stuff like Terra Steel, for example, being a really good way to make this thing defensive. You can also go with stuff like Terra Fairy and essentially turn this into a Trick Room version of Flutter Mane. You can make a lot of stuff work on this thing and just make it into a really defensive Flutter Mane and start going for stuff like Will-O-Wisp and Perish Song, etc. So I do actually think this thing has a place in the meta. I don't think it's a super viable place in the meta, but if stuff like Jump Pluff and Electro can make that D tier, I think Mischievous also deserves it at the very least. We've seen this thing actually have a lot of success in terms of like YouTuber teams. We've seen it do well on Ranked Ladder. So, what the heck? I'll give it D tier. Draft Rig sucks. Fortress sucks. Dunsparce sucks. Quillfish gets an E tier just for Toxic Spikes plus Intimidate. That's it. Scizor, I gave this thing an A tier last time. I'm going to give it a B tier this time. Scizor's fallen the fuck off. I thought this thing would be a really good Flutter Mane check. It's kind of okay. Scizor has a similar issue to Azumarill where it natively has a lot of really big power creep issues in this format. Scizor as well just has a big issue with stuff like Side Spam cores being really common. However, that's not to say that Scizor is an unusable Pokemon. It's actually not bad. I think that realistically you can make Scizor work for sure, whether it's Terra Water, Fire, Flying, Steel, etc. It's a really good Bandit option, Life Orb, Citrus Berry, Assault Vest, etc. You can make this thing work for sure on a team, but I think it's pretty Terra-reliant. Like, if you're not Terraing Scizor, you're almost always going to get kind of fucked because a lot of teams just have fire coverage now, or at the very least have a means of 2-KOing Scizor. So it's not terrible. I think the meta just has shifted away from Scizor being like a really fucking good mon. So I'm going to give it the B tier for sure. Heracross is up next. This thing gets the E tier just because it's kind of an okay Tailwind mon with like Terra Normal Facade or like Terra Fighting or like Terra Dark, but it's just a really shitty, slightly faster Hariyama. Sneasel gets E tier because of Fake Out plus the fact that it has Inner Focus, and that's about it. Also, the typing's okay at best. Ursaring gets an E tier just because of a Violate plus Guts, and that's kind of okay too. Delibird gets an F tier. It sucks. Houndoom sucks. Donphan sucks. Actually, that's a lie. Donphan gets Wide Guard. Donphan can get E tier because it gets a Wide Guard. Honestly, that's really the only reason this thing gets the E tier is because it's a wide... Oh, never mind. It doesn't get Wide Guard. I was mistaken. F tier. This thing sucks. Stantler sucks. Blissey sucks. Tyranitar S tier. Tyranitar proved to be a really big nuisance this format actually. So all of us Tyranitars with Terra Flying have been a huge surgeons up. On top of this as well, Tyranitar is a pretty amazing Terra option outside of Terra Flying though. With stuff like, for example, Terra Rock being a great option to take advantage of the Spadef boost, Terra Ghost being a great way to be outright immune to fighting, while also being really good just in general. With Terra Psychic, which is actually a pretty good Terra type in my opinion, with stuff like Indeedee. I've actually ran a team with this in the past on a Sandy Shocks build that had like Tailwind Talonflame, and we had a Trick Room route with Terra Psychic on AV Tyranitar, and it's pretty good for getting around Mungus, for example. It's actually a guaranteed OHKO, and it also helps a lot with stuff like summoning Fighting Weakness, also the fact that you would never ever really click a Dark or Ghost move to Tyranitar in Pre-Terra, and it helps at the very least in making you not necessarily Rock Slide weak, which is at least a pretty common offensive option. It's just another means of handling stuff, and also the fact that you can usually have your stabs between Crunch and also the coverage from Low Kick, handling a majority of stuff that would hit you super effective. So I think Tyranitar definitely has a really strong place in this meta. It's one of the better Terramons in my opinion. It's truthfully, I think at the time I put this thing as like a middle A tier mon. I would say this is one of the better S tiers now. I'm going to be completely honest. The meta has shifted super in favor of Tyranitar, and I think it's a really strong pick for any given team. Easy S tier. Pelipper gets a C tier. Rain isn't bad. I don't think a Palafin needs it though to be viable, and that's kind of the thing. It's really best used with Palafin, and Palafin has a lot of other playstyles that can use without Pelipper. So we'll give it C tier. It's still not bad. It has a good tailwind support, good wide guard, but it's kind of hard to justify a slot dude just because it kind of fucking sucks. Gardevoir, C tier. Trick Scarf is pretty good with stuff like Trace is obviously like your best ability. It's an okay counter to Dozo, so obviously that's pretty good for it. But overall though, I think a Gardevoir's typing in B tier 80 isn't really that great in this format, though it has some specific niche with stuff like Imprison Trick Room. Obviously Icy Wind support is pretty good, but it's just kind of whatever. Masquerain gets an F tier. This mon kind of sucks. Braylon gets a C tier as well. The Technician Spore with Bullet Seed is obviously pretty good. Mach Punch priority is also pretty valuable. This thing can make stuff like Loaded Dice work. It's not that great of a mon, but between Loaded Dice, Room Service, Focus Ash, Life Orb, this thing has some items that can kind of work for it. I don't think this is a great mon though. But I guess that you can creep bundle, which is kind of cool. With like a Loaded Dice Bullet Seed set, you can actually put a lot of pressure on non-booster bundles. You can also put a lot of pressure on Talonflame if you at least try and tear into something defensive and then just go for Rock Tomb. So you kind of do have some merit against some top mons, but overall, definite C tier for sure. Slacking gets an E tier just because of Terra Normal and the fact that you could, in theory, cheese with this with like some sort of get rid of ability strat, but it kind of sucks. Hariyama, I'm still giving this thing a B tier. This thing is actually pretty solid. I still think this is an amazing mon actually. And despite the fact this format was not exactly very kind to Hariyama, I still think it has a lot of stuff going for it. Typically, a lot of people will be running Iron Hands, and I think that necessarily isn't the case on every team where you need to be running Iron Hands. I think this thing has some merit on really good Trick Room builds, stuff like Wide Guard support as well as the Terra Dark or Terra Normal sets being extremely valuable for this thing. This thing, I would argue there are certain archetypes such as like Oranguru builds or like Furgraph builds that really do actually benefit from Hariyama a lot. Because they're typically Trick Room teams that ended up building into Torkoal weaknesses. Now, it's not to say that every Trick Room team needs to have Hariyama. You can still go with stuff like Armors, for example, with Indeedee and get a nice Flash Fire immunity and take out Torkoal that way. But Hariyama is a nice offensive way for Trick Room to get an immediate breaker. It's also an extremely unique item slot where Iron Hands is typically competing with stuff like Assault Vest and Citrus Berry and Safety Goggles that are all very unique, widespread items, especially on a lot of its partners. You're never really actually running Flame Orb on any other Pokemon that's viable in this format. So I'm going to give Hariyama B tier. I think it's a legitimate option to consider on your teams, and I think that it should be used more, to be completely honest. It's a pretty good pick. Sableye proved itself to be pretty good in this format, stuff like Quash, Trick Room, Will-O-Wisp, etc. This is definitely a really good mon. We're going to give it C tier. It's kind of like the really shitty love child of stuff like Grimmsnarl and also Murkrow. Medicham gets an E tier just because of the skill swap Trick Room strat. It's kind of unique in that regard, but it's okay at best. It's just kind of gimmicky. Shipmon, this thing fucking impressed me. I can't lie, this thing is kind of an offensive demon. I'm almost inclined to put it in D tier. I might have considered it if the team at least made day 2. It was a win away from doing it though. I can't lie, this thing is kind of a fire Trick Room option now. It's essentially Torkoal if Torkoal had a native stab that countered itself while also being able to tear it into types that benefited it slightly more matchup wise than Torkoal does. I think that Camerupt, if nothing else, with the Eruption plus a slightly wider coverage pool, has some kind of merit to it. It's a good charcoal option. It's a good Spexmon. Solid Rock is also a pretty good ability. And it's essentially like Torkoal that could take advantage of Torkoal a lot better because of Solid Rock. And especially with Terra, that's actually kind of filthy ability. So we're going to give this thing an E tier. But we might move that up to F. Actually, I am going to move that up to F tier. I think Solid Rock with Terra especially is actually something that is pretty damning for a lot of teams. It's a really strong way for Camerupt to essentially massacre most opponents. So we'll give it the D tier. I think that it kind of earns it as a weaker D tier spot. But I think it's at least, I can get where its place would be on a given team. I can't really say the same for a lot of the E tiers unless you're already just choosing to use them, so we'll give it that. Torkoal. I predicted Torkoal would fall off a lot. I think a lot of people did as well, and I actually had Torkoal in my A tier. I'm going to give Torkoal back its S tier space. Torkoal is still a really good mon, in all honesty, and I think a lot of people were worried that if I have a Fast Paradox Pokemon and I'm running Sun with Torkoal, why doesn't my opponent just run the same Fast Paradox Pokemon and just beat mine because it could take advantage of it while still getting a full team slot? And I think that was a little bit misguided because Torkoal still offers a lot, whether it's stuff like Yawn support. We saw Quick Claw Torkoal actually doing pretty well this format a couple times in tournaments. It has stuff like the Specs Trick Room sets that are still very fucking viable. This thing still definitely has a place in the format. Offensive Fire is incredible to just do damage with, and especially the Eruption being boosted by the Sun and being one of the best Trick Room mons in the game. This is an objective S tier for sure. One of the weaker ones, but it's definitely there. Sucks. Cloud9 plus Will-O-Wisp is kind of cool. Just this thing right here, but you're having a little bit better speed stat is all. Sucks. Love this thing. It has Wide Guard and it has kind of a cool option with like Terra and Harvest, and you can kind of make it work, but it still is kind of whatever. Sucks. Salamence, a real mon to talk about. Okay, it's C tier for sure. Salamence definitely has proved to have fallen off because of power creep this generation. I gave this thing a B tier last time. I think it was definitely misguided. I think I overrated a lot of the Intimidate mons, especially though, for what it's worth, B4 Arcanine really, truly, consistently was making top usage in everything it fucking did. At first I thought it was maybe just an early thing and that maybe some of the other Intimidators would come up in the format, but Arcanine clearly stole the show. It's one of the only ones that can keep up with power creep like that. Salamence having such a huge weakness to mons like Bundle, and if you Terra into Steel, the Resist Bundle, stuff like Great Tusk, it's pretty bad, or even just in general having weaknesses from Tusk, it's like Ice Spinner or Rock Slide is pretty bad. This thing kind of just needs to defensively Terra and actually have viability in matchups, because if it offensively Terras into something like a Flying or Dragon, it's still going to get massacred because the Spin F is not that great. It's a whatever Tailwind option, but for what it's worth, it's kind of okay at that roll compression. But it's really, that's it. It's just roll compression for Intimidate, Tailwind, Terra, Flying, and etc. But it's not that great of a mon. We'll give it C tier. Up next is Raptor. Raptor gets Final Gambit, and it's like 100 speed, so it's slightly faster than Ape, with also having Reckless, Brave Bird. It gets E tier. Kricketune fucking sucks. Luxray, this thing gets usage on JP actually. It's a kind of cool Trick Room mon with Intimidate. The typing is kind of unique as well, being a pure electric with a physical attacking stat. So we'll give it E tier if nothing else. Again, I know this thing gets actual JP usage. It's not a lot though, but it is noteworthy enough. I've seen it a few times in ladders when watching JP streams, so we'll give it E tier. It's okay. Venom, Vespiquen is shit. I didn't even remember its name. Pachirisu can get the E tier just because of the Volt Absorb plus Super Fang, though I will say if this was Lightning Rod, it would probably be a C tier pick for sure. It's just kind of whatever when I can just throw other redirection or just fucking ground type this format. That's the other thing too, is I think that ground types are finally like really fucking viable now. So like, why actually run the electric immunity through ability? Why not just run the ground type? So yeah, that fell off a bit. Floatzel gets a D tier. This thing kind of fell off a bit too, I can't lie. I thought this would be a C tier mon. Rain in general with anything that's not Palafin fell off huge. Even then, Palafin isn't exactly needed on Rain anymore. Floatzel still is pretty good though. Among this Wishbone Bunch, it is like the fastest one, besides Barraskewda, but Barraskewda fucking sucks. I was thinking stuff like Wave Crash and Aqua Jet. It also is pretty decent as far as an offensive Terra goes. Overall, I think Floatzel is pretty good. It's not the best mon, but it is far from the worst. D tier. Gastrodon. Gastrodon's fucking amazing, actually. I gave this thing an S tier last time. I actually fully stand by that. This is an incredible Terra Fire option. It's one of the best defensive Terras you can really throw on a team. It's one of the only defensive Terras I actually think that can always just win against certain teams, because for some reason, not every team is running ground types or rock moves still. I thought that was just something that I was doing to be fucking stupid at Orlando, but a lot of teams actually are still not running that ground coverage, despite the fact that it's pretty valuable, which means that Terrafire Gastrodon can still actually ransack a lot of matchups. It's a great check to Dondozo. It's one of the best checks in the game to Dondozo, actually, as far as defensiveness goes, with stuff like Clear Smog and also stuff like Earth Power for the Terra Steel sets. It's a great recover mon as well. It's a good yawn machine. It's great on balances. It has a lot of good partners. This thing supports with Storm Drain because it's a pulling option. So mons like Tyranitar, Arcanine, etc. really do love having this thing as a partner. So we'll give this thing an S tier for sure. Really strong pick. Drifblim. E tier just because of the fact this thing gets Strength Stat plus some Burden and it's enough unique support, but it still fucking sucks. Mismagius fucking sucks. Honchkrow fucking sucks. Skuntank fucking sucks. Bronzong gets a C tier. This is an okay Terramon. I think Bronzong's fallen off in all honesty. It's just really easy to beat with a lot of pre-Terra options. And if you're bringing Zong as a Terra Trick Room mon, It's not really doing a lot after the Terror to really justify its placement. I guess Gravity Hypnosis is kind of cool, but at the same time, though, there's just a lot of better options for that this format, I would argue. And by a lot of better options, I mean one option that does it significantly better. But yeah, this is okay at best. We'll give it C tier. That might be an over tier. Actually, I'm going to give it D tier because there's a mon that I think does about the same job as Trick Room usage goes, but I don't want to give that one a C tier, being Spiritomb. Now, Spiritomb actually kind of surprised me, I can't lie. Spiritomb's actually been a pretty good Trick Room option. It's not good enough, though, to where I want to keep its ranking from last time, which I actually gave it a C tier last time. I don't know what kind of crack I was on to give these both C tier last time, but truthfully, I think it's definitely not as good as a lot of the C tier picks. Stuff like Pelipper, for example, I think is a lot more consistent. Stuff like Gyarados, I think is a lot more consistent, but it's still a fine enough Triggramon. The typing alone is already pretty good, and it gets stuff like Pain Split, Will-O-Wisp, Sucker Punch, Shadow Sneak, Hex, etc. So it's got some nice merit. It's just Mischievous, but without a Violet, though this thing also has the benefit of having a very unique item, whereas the Spiritomb, despite having a much better natural typing, has a lot more cluttered item usage, whether it's stuff like Citrus Berry, Mental Herb, etc. We'll give it D tier, though. I think they're fine. I just think that Mischievous actually does kind of compete with this thing as far as a good Trick Room setter goes. Garchomp. Garchomp's a solid, really solid A tier. Actually, I'm gonna give this thing an S tier. I think I almost gave this thing an S tier last time, if I remember correctly. I think it does earn it for what it's worth. This thing is actually a really good pick. I think we finally started coming around in Garchomp as a community, and I think this thing is a really good offensive mon. It keeps up with Great Tusk, in my opinion, just it does very different things. The speed tier at 102 is actually incredible for this thing. It helps with a lot of common mons like Volcarona, for example, as well as just other 100s. Overall, though, that typing is incredible. It's a great Terra option with stuff like Ground, Steel, Fire, Rock, Dragon, etc. It has really just the fact that it's naturally fast. Going for Rock Slide and Tailwind teams is incredible for it. You can even outpace a lot of stuff like Booster Bundle, which is something that Great Tusk actually does not have the benefit of doing, funny enough. Even with its jolly max speed on Tailwind, it cannot outpace Booster Bundle, whereas Garchomp can, and that's a huge benefit as well to it that Great Tusk can never have the luxury of doing. Now, Great Tusk is a lot better of a damage output just through Headlong Rush alone, as well as a better dual typing for the metagame, but I still think that Garchomp holds up. It's still an incredible offensive option, and I think that despite the fact that Talonflame Tusk was the first trademarked really strong Tailwind option that everyone was running, I think that Garchomp still is in the conversation. Albeit, I think that Great Tusk is a lot more brain dead, but Garchomp is still in the conversation. S tier. Lucario. This thing gets a D tier just because of Terra Normal E-Speed and the fact that it is good coverage for a lot of those E-Speed resistances with stuff like Meteor Mash as well as Close Combat. Hippowdon gets a D tier just because it's a good Sand Setter and it has stuff like Yawn and Helping Hand, which is kind of good on a really good Fizdef tank. Toxicroak gets an E tier just because of the fact that its typing is really good to help partner with fighting. It has Fake Out, good mixed offenses, and a lot of other hyper-specific things, but it still kind of fucking sucks. So we'll give this thing the E tier. Lumineon kind of impressed me, I can't lie. This thing did kind of well one time on one random team that we ran it on, and I'm kind of fucking sold on it now, I'm going to be honest. This thing, weirdly enough, has a nice, very hyper-specific niche of being a Tailwind mon that can also tear into something like Fire with Storm Drain and essentially function as a really niche-specific Gastrodon matchup. Also, Safeguard is actually pretty valuable support on this thing, I can't lie. Never thought I'd say that Safeguard was a valuable support option. The team I ran on it specifically ran like Safeguard, Tailwind, I think like Encore, and then Chilling Water, if I remember correctly. I never thought I would actually be running Lumineon, I can't lie. I was also appalled that I actually threw this thing on a team. But threw this thing on a team, I mean fucking stole one from someone smarter than I am. But it's a kind of cool pick, so we're going to give it the E tier. It's actually not terrible. Anyway, Abomasnow. Abomasnow is really fucking good, actually. This thing gets an A tier for sure. Really great hail setter. It's overall a pretty great check to stuff like Palafin, for example, which is still ransacking the tier for sure. Overall, this thing is an incredible offensive monster, and in my opinion, I think that Abomasnow is one of the best weather setters. I think that Pelipper, unironically, is the worst one right now. I think then it goes Abomasnow, and then Torkoal, and then Tyranitar, as far as weather goes, which, if you ask me pre-format, I would have said the order went probably Pelipper, then Torkoal, then like T-Tar, and then Abomasnow. I think Abomasnow's now the third, but it's a pretty close third. It's one of the better A tiers in my opinion. Definitely a strong pick though. This is a great counter to stuff like Bundle, Dondozo, etc., which Dondozo is still getting a ton of usage. So having that really good Dondozo counter is valuable. A tier. Weavile. It's just Sneasel, but it doesn't have inner focus, but it has a little bit better offenses. We have this Magnezone. This thing gets an E tier just because of Terra plus Analytic and the fact that it is kind of okay. Leafeon. F tier, sucks. Glaceon, it's a cool Terra pick, and it also can benefit from Hail, which is kind of okay right now, but at the same time, though, you're really just using it as a Trick Room Hail variant, which I think the bundle of non-Trick Room variants is just better. Okay, I said non-Trick Room variants as if, you could run Hail and Trick Room, and then suddenly bundle has to be a worse option. And that's not even true either. I think the bundle is a pretty okay option under Bomb Snow Trick Room. But I think you could at least justify it on a Bomb Snow Trick Room running the Glaceon. I just think the bundle is objectively a better partner with it. So we'll give this thing an E tier. This thing is just kind of outclassed by a lot of other ice types right now, but it's not terrible. Gallade gets a C tier. Power Creep kind of fucked this thing over, I can't lie. I predicted in my tier list for Series 2. Where did I actually put this on? Did I really also give this thing a C tier? I can't lie, didn't expect that. I thought I would have given this thing a B tier. Well, I stand by the C tiering for sure. I think it's definitely a C tier pick. Overall, Gallade just kind of has a bit of an issue with just how offensive a lot of this format is. It's not to say that it's a bad Pokemon by any means. Gallade actually still has some pretty unique support with stuff like Imprison, Wide Guard. You also get stuff like Sacred Sword, which is actually really fucking valuable for Dozo matchups. However, at the same time, I think the bundle is just such a good Dozo counter now that a lot of teams aren't looking for stuff like Gallade, which is kind of a middling Dozo counter. So we'll give this thing a C tier. That's not bad though. Frostlass gets E tier just because of really unique support with stuff like Will-O-Wisp, Icy Wind. It's just kind of a shitty Gengar is all. It's honestly, yeah, shitty Gengar is the way to put it. It's just the worst Gengar. Rotom base sucks. Rotom Fan can get this tier as well. Rotom Frost can get the D tier. Rotom Mo can get, Rotom Frost can get the E tier. Rotom Mo can get the D tier. Rotom Heat and Wash, though, can get a B tier. They're both actually kind of solid. We'll start with Base. That sucks. Fan also sucks. Frost can just kind of be a worse version of Water, but it's still not exactly great. But at least its pre-Terra typing isn't fucking useless for that Levitate ability, unlike Fan. We have Mo, which is pretty decent on Rain, but Rain is already kind of shit right now, and you're not really running Rain, and even still, it's kind of a niche pick at best for matchups like Gastrodon, which Rain just has better partners to handle now. And then Heat and Wash, these are both pretty good. This one right here is a really good counter for Amoonguss without Terra, and this one's a really good counter of Amoonguss with Terra. It just depends, I guess, if you want to run the Terra on Rotom as fire, or if you want to run the Terra as something fucking else. But they're both pretty good. They're both pretty equal in value. One benefit for this, though, is the fact that it doesn't drop its special attack with the Terra Fire or Terra Blast. This thing does, but at the same time, though, you hit a lot harder naturally, and you don't need to Terra to hit it. So, give and take there, really. They're both kind of okay options, though, defensively speaking, and they'll both get B tier. Next, we do have the Lilligant. Lilligant can get a C tier for sure. This thing actually kind of piped up. The biggest issue with Lilligant, truthfully, is the fact that it's kind of an accuracy machine. The fact that you do need to hit sleep guards consistently well to actually make this thing valuable. However, at the same time, though, it's a pretty good chlorophyll mon. It just won in a previous regional. I think that was for Vancouver, if I remember correctly. Yep, Vancouver was the one it won. It's pretty decent with stuff like Terra Ghost, with stuff like not Pollen Puff, After You plus Sleep Powder. So you can make this thing work, and it's actually pretty decent because you can just barely outpace mons like Booster Bundle, which is a pretty good speed tier to hit. So we'll give this thing a C tier for sure. Basculins fucking suck. Crocodile gets an E tier because of Intimidate, but it's kind of a shitty Intimidate mon. Actually, I'll give this thing a D tier. Ground is a decent typing to have, and it's kind of unique in that regard. The fact that it's Ground Dark, you can make this thing as a niche check this stuff like Size Spam, but it's still kind of bad. Zoroark gets E tier because of Illusion. This thing will never technically be an F tier, even though it fucking sucks. Gothitelle gets an S tier. Trapping is fucking amazing right now. Gothitelle in general is just a really strong S tier Shadow Tag mon. I think that Gothitelle is just a really good valued support piece. We've seen Wolfie actually win the first Series 2 regional with this thing. And on top of that as well, it has some really good support, whether it's the Trick Room, whether it's with Fake Out, whether it's with Heal Pulse, Perish, Trapping, etc. You can make this thing work. I'm going to give this thing an S tier. It's really benefiting off of Terra especially, and despite the fact that people can Terra Ghost around it, you can also Terra into other types, make this thing practically unkillable. So we'll give this thing an S tier for sure. Up next, Amoonguss can get an S tier actually. I give this thing an S plus in the first tier list. I no longer agree with that. I think Amoonguss has fallen off a little bit. That's not to say it's a bad mon. I just think that in general, Power Creep has gotten a lot better. I think teams have gotten a lot better about respecting Amoonguss, but it still is objectively a really good redirection Pokemon overall. I think that one of the biggest factors going out of Amoonguss' favor, though, is how good a lot of these offensive builds are. They can pressure it, whether it's Size Spam, whether it's stuff like Acro Roaring Moon, that is still actually a lot better than I gave it credit for initially, whether it's stuff like Terra Blast, Dragonite, etc., etc. Now, Amoonguss is still an incredible mon. I just think that a lot more teams have counterplay for Amoonguss than they did before. Not to say that they were just outright ignoring one of the best mons of the format, but I think that pretty much every team can just kind of muscle Amoonguss if they really want to, unless they're really fucking bad. So we'll give this thing an S tier. Alomomola sucks. Eel gets E tier because of Levitate plus Terra. Hacker gets E tier because of really high offense plus Terra. Slush Rush plus Terra. Levitate plus Terra. This thing kind of fucking sucks. This thing Defiant. This thing is still pretty fucking good. I'll give this thing an A tier. High Dragon proved to be still pretty good with the Terra options. This thing overall is still a really good mon. Despite the fact that in general, High Dragon has fallen off in favor of mons like Roaring Moon with the typing, or even stuff like Garchomp without the shared mutual typing, but still for a dragon. High Dragon still is a pretty good option, whether it's Scope Lens, Assault Vest, Choice Specs, Tailwind, etc. You can make High Dragon definitely work in your favor in a lot of different games, and I think that it's an option that a lot of people are starting to respect more. So we'll give this thing an A tier. Hydra definitely, I think, is still going to be a really good anti-meta mon in this format, despite the fact that it was one of the best ones in Series 1. It's just kind of going to be there as a really good pick to specifically tear around really key threats, and that's what it's best at doing, to be honest. And I think as the format continues, we'll still see that happening, where it's going to be like Terra Steel for different matchups for grounds, or you're going to see like Terra Poison, which is going to be good for just different fairies, and that's pretty much what its role is going to be. Volcarona can also get the A tier. I think last time I gave this thing an S tier, Volk has fallen off a bit. Not to say that it's a bad mon by any means. Volcarona is still incredible Rage Powder support, but at the same time, though, I think that Volcarona having a bit of a Terra reliance, as well as one of his best options being Heatwave, which is a little bit inaccurate. We've also seen a lot of teams like Dozogiri doing really well still. We've seen a lot of stuff in general. It's Terra going for fire or water right now that's doing well. Tyranitar is at an all-time high. I don't think the Volcarona is holding up as well as it did in Series 1 or in early portions of Series 2. Not to say that it's a bad mon, it is still incredible. I just think that Volcarona is a little bit of a power creep issue is all at the current moment. And I think the meta has shifted a little bit away from it. It still is an incredible pick on teams, but it's no longer going to be a presence that you truly do need to respect in every game. So we'll give this thing an A tier. Up next, we have Spupa, E tier because of Friend Guard. Vivian gets a D tier just because of Compound Eyes, Sleep Powder, plus Friend Guard on the set as well. You can make either work. Dragalge is a pretty cool Trick Room Terra option, actually. We've seen this thing do well on a couple Series 2 ladder teams. Between the fact that it's Dragon and Poison typing, you actually get some fairly unique coverage out of that, and also you're a really good breaker for Trick Room, while also having Toxic Spikes, which can pressure Dozo, so we'll give this thing a D tier for sure. It's actually not terrible. Florges gets a D tier, actually. Symbiosis is not bad. For what it's worth, I will say that I think I definitely overhyped this thing a little bit, putting it in the C tier last time. That's not to say that it's a terrible mod, but I think that stuff like Helping Hand, Pollen Puff, etc., despite being good support, and on top of the ability being good in terms of partnering with Paradox mons, at the same time that this thing is a little bit hard to justify just because the coverage is kind of shit, the typing is whatever as pure fairy, and also the fact that realistically your Fizdef is not great in a meta that is leaning so physically heavy right now. So we'll give this thing a D tier. Not terrible, but it's definitely outclassed. Go-Go, unironically, not fucking bad. There's a lot worse mons than Go-Go, that's for fucking sure. This thing is pretty cool, actually. I ran this thing on the Limb Mini on Team, funny enough, with like Terra Rock, and this thing is kind of a monster. Realistically, you would run this thing essentially with like Bulk Up Rock Slide, Milk Drink, and Bullet Seed, and you throw on like a loaded dice. It can get the job done pretty well. Sap Sipper is a pretty cool ability, obviously. You know, you can boost your attack by getting hit with a grass move. This means if your opponent tries to Spore one of your Pokemon, you could harden Go-Go on that turn, take the Spore, boost your attack, and then just start bulk upping in front of its face, and you can make that work. And it also helps a lot with the Terra Rock, because one of the best ways to hit rock types is with grass attacks. So you can't even put it to sleep after the Terra Rock, which is pretty cool. We'll give Go-Go the E tier. It's unironically not the worst E tier even. I would argue there's worse E tiers, and I'm not even talking about Spupa. I'm talking about like Weavile and shit. So we'll give this thing E tier. It's unironically not bad. Dedenne fucking sucks. Avalugg Wide Guard Trick Room is like kind of okay on this mon, for what it's worth. I don't think that Avalugg is the worst thing in the world, but it's not a great Trick Room mon. Really, it's just that 28 base speed that kind of gives it enough of merit to get the E tier, and that's about it. Talonflame. I give Talonflame an S tier on the last tier list, and that definitely fucking holds up. Talonflame is a part of one of the best offensive archetypes in the game right now, being Talon Tusk. It's a great support piece with stuff like Tailwind and Willow support, as well as stuff like Taunt or Sunny Day that you could throw on as well to help alleviate your team. Prankster, well, not Prankster, Galewing's boosted Brave Bird is obviously really amazing. Talonflame is continuously hitting top 10 usage, whether it's Showdown, Wi-Fi, etc. This thing is objectively just a really good pick, and I think that in general, Talonflame is a really terrifying offensive piece. It's a great way around a lot of common stuff, like, for example, Terragrass Iron Hands, or even just Great Tusk. It's a great way to pressure that with stuff like Will-O-Wisp support as well as Priority Gale Wings. Overall, it's an incredible S tier for sure. Definitely one of the best monsters as far as support goes this generation. I would argue the only better support mon right now is probably Amoonguss, but Talonflame is definitely a close second. Indeedee could also rival that for what it's worth, but I think Amoonguss is the clear best, and then the Talonflame and Indeedee both kind of come close. Claw, kind of an interesting pick. It's an okay Trick Room threat, and you get some really good offensive options. However, its B tier is a little awkward to be consistent on Trick Room, so we'll give it E tier. Klefki, this thing is just Sableye, but it has a fairy resistance, so I'm going to tier it in the same tier I put Sableye, but it has a fairy resistance. We're gonna give it a C tier. Support's a little different, I know, but they pretty much are being ran for the same roles. It's stuff like dual screens, and you're gonna run other random support on it, and like one offensive move, which is probably foul play. Hawlucha, kind of a shit mon. You're not really seeing terrain. I thought terrain would be a little bit bigger than it was. That's not to say I thought Hawlucha would be good, but I didn't think it would be this terrible necessarily. I definitely think that Hawlucha in general is a pretty bad mon right now, to be completely honest. Now, it's not to say that Hawlucha is outright unusable, but at the same time, I don't think Hawlucha is good, and I think I've already given it more words than I want to give it. Last time I happened to give this thing an E tier, I stand by that. Noivern gets the D tier just solely because of really fast Tailwind plus Super Fang and Taunt support. It's pretty unique. Infiltrator is also not terrible, but overall, just kind of a frail fucking mon. Goodra gets an E tier just because it has an 80 speed, which can kind of work for Trick Room and kind of work for Tailwind, and it has a nice Spit F stat that can kind of work for Trestle, but it kind of fucking sucks in everything else. Garbink fucking sucks. Sylveon. This thing is still incredible, actually. I forget where I put Sylveon on the last tier list. I'm still giving this thing an S tier. This is still objectively speaking a really strong offensive pick for teams. I think that in general, one of the biggest benefits that this thing has going for it is the fact that Sylveon has the pre-Terra option of going for single target Terra Blast, or you can have the post-Terra option of going for the Terra Fire version of Terra Blast. And essentially, in either scenario, you're getting a stab out of it, because whether you're going for pre-Terra and you're going to go for a Terra Fairy Terra Blast, or a Fairy type Terra Blast, I should say, that will be pixelate boosted, or you're going to go for post-Terra and you're going to go for a Terra Fire Terra Blast, you can make a lot work of this thing. It's a great helping hand mon. It also has great support with stuff like Kyon. Overall, Sylveon is an incredible threat. Easy S tier for sure. We're going to look into Toxic specs next. Wide Guard is plus Haze and Toxic Spikes, E tier. Salazzle, this thing gets stuff like Fake Out, and it gets like Oblivious. It's whatever, it's an E tier mon. Oranguru, Oranguru can get a D tier. It's a kind of cool Trick Room option still. It has stuff like, for example, Telepathy, so it partners well with Belly Bolt, though you can also still make Symbiosis work, similar to Florges, and pass items to Paradox mons. Objectively, this is a fine enough pick for teams. I don't think it's that great, but it's not terrible either. D tier. Next we have Kamala, fucking sucks. Serena, E tier just solely because of Queenly Majesty, and that's quite literally it. We have a better mon for it anyway, but it's not terrible. Basimian fucking sucks. Mimikyu actually surprised me. Mimikyu still gets the A tier. However, I think I remember last time saying that Mimikyu was one of the weakest A tiers that we had. I retract that. I think actually the Curse Mimikyu is proven to be pretty good. It's a great dozer counter, as well. Being a Trick Room mon that has Will-O-Wisp support as well as Taunt is actually pretty valuable. This thing has stuff like Shadow Sneak as offensive moves, or you can just go with Shadow Claw and make this thing work. It's one of the worst upper tier Terramons. Like if I had to take the entire A through S tier, it's probably the worst Terramon, if not one of the worst you could run. But it doesn't really matter because the support is so fucking consistent that it doesn't really fail at it. And it's really good at just getting around stuff that your team otherwise might not be able to handle. So we'll give this thing an A tier. It's a pretty decent mon. Up next we have Palisand. Fucking sucks. Or Choreo Forms. They all fucking suck, but I'm giving Electric E tier. The rest of them can go to hell. Actually, I'll also give Ghost the E tier. These both are just better type mons, truthfully, and they both can at least almost take advantage of Dancer. The other two just fucking suck right now. We have Gumshoes. Fucking sucks. Lycanroc. Lycanroc actually gets a B tier. This thing has proven to be a pretty decent option actually on sand. Endeavor is still incredibly valuable, and realistically, a lot of teams definitely do kind of hate just the fact they have to take Endeavor into a Accelerock. And with Tyranitar also being as good as it is right now, Lycanroc actually has kind of a place in the format, just by coincidence of being a 6th mon in Tyranitar teams. So we'll give this thing a B tier. It's actually not bad still. It's doing a lot better than I thought it would, which is a lot, because I think last time I actually gave this thing a D tier, if I remember correctly. I forget where specifically I put it, but it definitely was not B tier, that's for sure. I'm looking through. No, I give this thing a C tier. This is still fine. I just think it's a little bit better now than I did that time. Moving on though, we have Lycanroc Knight, F tier. Dusk, F tier. Mudstill can get a C tier actually. This is not a bad option on Trick Room. This gets a lot of good support stuff, whether it's an assault vest set that's going for stuff like body slam, whether not body slam, body press, whether you're going for trick room sets that have stuff like roar, for example, or other status options like iron defense plus body press. You can go with, I guess, you're not really gonna go for weather on this thing. The point being is that Mudstill's not terrible. It's a decent trick room option as a ground type. It's still just a decent mon in general. But like it could be whatever. It's a C tier mon for sure. Moving on, we have Bruxish. This gets D tier off of ability alone. That's really it. Blocking priority is kind of cool though. Crab, this thing gets E tier just solely off the typing plus the speed tier being under stuff like Iron Hands. It can actually be a pretty good killer to Trick Room Terragrass Iron Hands, on top of the fact as well this thing gets wide guard support, which is pretty good. It's just slightly faster Avalog, but the typing is a lot better offensively, so we'll give this thing an E tier. Laurentis, Trick Room plus Contra is kind of cool. This thing still kind of sucks, gen, E tier. Dreadnought. Dreadnought gets a D tier. Switch Swim is down right now, but Dreadnought is still a pretty decent trigger mop on Switch Swimwear. The Terra Rock or Terra Grass sets are still pretty good. This thing is Rock Water, obviously offensively is incredible. It's kind of just outclassed by Palafin though as far as rain goes. Palafin is just taking over every rain team, and it really just only needs to be Palafin and maybe Bundle on a rain team. That's about it. So Dreadnought sadly just got power crept. Greedent, it fucking sucks. Barrascuda. This thing gets an no, this thing gets a D tier. Barrascuda is still kind of fine, but it's just a switch to mon that outpaces Bundle with booster energy. Well, Tailwind and Bundle, of course, gets outpaced by this, assuming that Bundle is not also running booster energy on the Tailwind team. But Pelipper could also go for Tailwind with this thing and essentially just give this thing the fastest speed tier in the entire game, which is pretty cool actually. I can't lie, that's actually kind of valuable, but that's really the only reason it keeps his niche is because in theory it is the fastest mon in the game without any sort of actual setup moves like a Dragon Dance or an Agility and stuff like that. But it's still not that great, so we'll give this thing a D tier. Moving on though, we do have the Corviknight. Corviknight actually is a pretty good mon. Corviknight is still going to be an A tier, but it's proven to still consistently be a really good A tier. Stuff like Terra Dragon sets being incredible, or stuff like Terra. I think Dragon's actually the pretty most common one along and away. But that's not to say that Corviknight's bad. It's actually an incredible pick as far as the in-game goes. Whether you're going for this thing as like a Tailwind option, like a bulk up option, you can make this thing work for sure. Rocky Helmet, Safety Goggles, etc. all are really good items in this thing. Apparently Terra Ground and Fire also ran, and I can kind of get the logic in both actually. One of the biggest benefits to running Corviknight though is the Mirror Armor ability. Being able to bounce back Intimidate from stuff like Arcanine, for example, is actually incredibly helpful. And especially for offensive Corviknights with stuff like Bulk Up, Tailwind, for example, you can make this thing do a really good threat. So we'll give Corviknight an A tier. This thing is really hard to KO, especially with Gastrodon, to be completely honest. So yeah, Tox gets the D tier. Actually, this thing gets C tier. It's kind of a cool Tailwind option, and especially with the Terra Normal Boom Burst, it still kind of works well, but at the same time, though, you're harming your partner with that, so give and take. Phalanx fucking sucks. Copper Jaw sucks. Cole can get a D tier just because the fact that Steam Engine is kind of obnoxious, but it's really hard to pull this off without like a Dragon Bolt, because nothing else is really successful at pulling that off, and even then, Dragon Bolt is kind of a niche mon right now, so we'll give this thing a D tier. Moving on, we do have Sandaconda. Sandaconda sucks. Indeedee Male gets E tier off the fact that Indeedee is so good, but it is such a huge discrepancy using Indeedee Male versus Female. Indeedee Female, though, gets the S tier. Side spam is incredible right now. This thing almost has a case for S+, but I'm going to give this thing an S tier just off the fact that it is still a good support piece, even outside of side spam teams. With stuff like Tyranitar, for example, it's a great support partner, but at the same time, though, Indeedee is still pretty easily prepped around. I think a lot of people have just natural counters to side spam at this point, which means that they're going to usually have a route to beat Indeedee specifically on that core to shut down side spam. Whether it's stuff like a really good partner to KO Indeedee plus Ice Spin or Dragonite, or just other options like that. But overall, still not a bad option, just it's definitely a little bit worse than it was before, though Indeedee is still one of the best support bonds. S tier. Pincurchin. Pincurchin can get a C tier, actually. This thing has proven to be kind of a decent offensive threat. Specifically, it's really good on teams with like Iron Hands and Trick Room. But it's still kind of niche for sure. I'm not going to act like Pincurchin is some messiah or anything. But at the same time, though, Pincurchin unironically does have some stuff going for it. Stuff like, for example, Chilling Water, I think it gets. I know obviously you're kind of bulky, at least as far as it's like an okay amount of bulk. But between stuff like Chilling Water, you can help with that bulk a little more, or just be a good momentum option for teams with momentum. You also get stuff like Sucker Punch for priority, T-Spikes for Dozo, etc. So we'll give this thing a C tier. It's not terrible, actually. We'll give the next mon being Frostmoth. This thing can get a D tier actually. It's a cool Terra pick for sure, with Ice Scales actually being a pretty good ability. I've seen this thing do well in some online tours, but Frostmoth at the same time hasn't really done well since the online tour days that were really heavily pushing Limitless. But it's an okay pick. I won't act like it's amazing or anything, but Terra, Ground, Rock, Fire, etc. are all pretty decent Terra types on it. This thing in D tier for sure. It's just okay at best. Grimmsnarl gets an S tier. This thing has proven to actually be incredible. I think I mentioned at the beginning of the format that I think this thing would be the best Prankstermon, with stuff like screens being more valuable this gen, and I couldn't agree more. This thing has proven to actually be an incredible support piece for teams, and I think that realistically they all really appreciated running this thing with stuff like Misty Train, Light Screen Reflect, Parting Shot, Taunt, etc. So we'll give this thing the S tier for sure. Up next is Flapple. Shit. Appleton gets E for Apple Acid, and that's really it. Hatterene, I think I gave this thing like a B tier, maybe even a C tier last time. I don't remember where I put Hatterene, I'm gonna be completely honest. It was the B tier. Actually, I stand by that. I was gonna say B tier was gonna be where I put it. I still think it's pretty fair. It's still a fairly good option for sure. It's still really good on Trick Room teams. You can run stuff like Covert Cloak, Terra Water, and be incredibly bulky. It's a really good option as well with Terra Fairy, and being one of the slowest offensive fairies you can throw on a team. It's pretty not bad. At first, I didn't really like pairing it with the DD, but I think as the format has progressed, it's become a really good option again, as it's a really good way of spreading Spread Gleam, and in tandem with Helping Hand and DD, it still is actually pretty powerful. Not as powerful as the Generation 8 days, but it still is pretty powerful. B tier for sure. Poltergeist sucks. Sojourner gets E tier off of Power Spot alone. ICU sucks. Dragapult, I gave this thing an A tier last time. I think I kind of overestimated how good this would be. I'm giving it a B tier. It's not bad by any means. I just think that it's kind of hard to justify an offensive ghost that's not Fluttermane. But objectively though, this thing is still a pretty good Terra option. You could still run some good support, like for example, Will-O-Wisp and Hex. You still can run offensive Terra types like Terra Blast, for example, and go with Terra Steel to try and pressure offensive Fluttermanes and be really effective in that regard. It's just kind of hard to justify. The biggest justification for this, truthfully, is the fact that no one will prep for its speed tier because everyone only creeps with the bundle. That's really the only reason you could justify it on the team, though. B tier. Moving on, we have Meowscarada. Now, I think I gave Meowscarada an S tier last time, and that definitely was actually an over tier. Meowscarada's still not bad, but the format quickly adapted around this mon. This thing was really good pre-Paradox Mon. Now it's just another offensive dark in the tier, and I think that we have a lot of better ones like Tyranitar, Roaring Moon, King Gambit, etc. So we're going to give this thing an A tier for sure. It's not bad, just I think that a lot of other darks are better. And I think that even as far as dozo counters go, we have stuff like Abomasnow that holds up pretty well. We have Bundle, which is fucking insane. We have Clear Smog Torkoal becoming meta now, so Meowscarada's just not as needed anymore. Skeletors, I gave this thing a B tier last time. This thing honestly just gets a C tier. It's kind of hard to justify it now. It's pretty outclassed by a lot of different options as far as dozo checking goes. It's a little bit hard to justify because you have to Terra it because it has bad type against two of the best mons in the format, being of course the Fluttermane and Bundle, while still also being weak to a lot of other top mons like Roaring Moon and Great Tusk. So we'll give this thing a C tier. It's not bad. It's a great Terra mon, but it has to Terra or it fucking sucks in a game. Quackleval, I'm giving this thing a D tier. This thing isn't terrible, but I think that again, this one of the best playstyles for it was Rain, and it's kind of hard to justify Rain that's not Palafin anymore. And you don't really need more than just Palafin at this point in the format, so we'll give this thing a D tier. It's not great. Oinkolones fucking suck. The Dunsparce gets an E tier because it's bulky with Glare, and that's kind of okay. Spidops fucking sucks. Low Kicks fucking sucks. Rapska gets a D tier. Actually, Revival Blessing is okay, but Power Creep really kind of fucks his mon over. At the same time, though, Revival Blessing is such a fucking good move, and Trick Room is so appreciated with this mon, and it's justifiable at least, and we'll give this thing a D tier. Moving on, we have Houndstone. Houndstone can get a D tier as well. This is an okay option on Sand with stuff like Body Press, Will-O-Wisp, Blast Respects, etc. But at the same time, though, most Sand teams really only care about running Endeavor plus Lycanroc, and even then, most Tyranitars don't even run Sand to begin with. As far as at least like a Sand team, I should say. They obviously all run Sandstream, but they don't really run Sand teams. So we'll give this thing a D tier. It's not terrible, but it's just kind of hard to justify. It doesn't even really get that fast with 68 speed with Sand Rush, so yeah, it's just not great. Spathra. Spathra's pretty good. This thing is a great option with stuff like Sandy Shocks, but it fell off for sure. Gravity Hypnosis, while still not being a bad option, isn't at least as sought after as it was before. However, at the same time, the support this thing has with stuff like Speed Boost plus screens is pretty okay, so we'll give this thing a B tier. It went from probably being one of the better B tier mons to truthfully one of the weakest, but I think I'm fine with that. Up next, Photograph. Now, Photograph actually got an S tier last time, and I don't really know how I feel about that anymore. That's not to say that Photograph is bad, but at the same time, though, Photograph definitely actually fell off a lot in usage. Side spam is really just taking over, as well as Gothtel usage is just shooting up. We'll give Frigg an A tier. It still is a pretty valuable priority blocker. It still has its place in certain builds, actually, where it values the slot a lot more than Iron Hand, than DD, such as in teams with Iron Hands, for example, because you're not making yourself weaker to Expanding Force, which is pretty cool. And also, you're blocking priority for only your opponents, not yourself. So with partners like King Gambit, it's actually incredible. Overall, though, this thing is definitely an A tier mon, though it's one of the better A tiers. It fell off a little, not a lot though. Bug Trio fucking sucks. I'm gonna go through all the shit mons right now. Veluza fucking sucks, but it at least is a cool signature move. Scovillain, it's a Sun mon, that's really about it. Rev of Room fucking sucks. We have Orthworm, which fucking sucks, but it has Shed Tail at least and ground immunity. We have Cyclizar, fucking sucks, but Shed Tail. We have Bombardier fucking sucks, but I will say the fact that this thing has room service, this thing kind of paid off, actually. I can't lie. I can no longer shit on Bombardier. It has an actual place in the format. This thing is okay enough with the fact that it has a lot of good abilities, and Terra Normal actually hits pretty hard, but it still is whatever. Flamingo is just kind of fucking niche. Cloth sucks outright. We have Dash Bund, which is kind of niche with the fire immunity, but it's still not great. Mabastiff fucking sucks even for an Intimidator. Despite Intimidate, it still sucks. Brambleghast, Wind Move immunity is kind of cool. That's really about it. Do we have any other like really dog shit mons? I guess this thing, the fucking Toad School. This thing gets an E tier just solely for the fact it's bulkier than Toad School, and Toad School just fucking sucks. We'll give this thing an F tier. And Jigglypuff. All right, Jigglypuff. This thing also gets the E tier just because of Friend Guard. I gave the other Friend Guard mons that, so I'll give this thing an E tier. This goes above Persian. There we go. Okay. Everything else is justifiable to discuss. Okay. We'll start off with the Dozo. Dozo actually gets an S tier. This thing continued to be really strong in this format, and despite the fact that Order Up got nerfed mid-format, it doesn't really matter. Dozo is still one of the best Terra options in the format. It still is kind of hard for a lot of teams to handle, and usually a late game Dozo can be beneficial. Now, I will say a lot of the Parish teams are on the rise, which does actually hurt Dozo pretty badly, but it's still a pretty decent offensive Terramon, and it still is able to clean through a lot of teams. Stuff like Covert Cloak is great, as well as items like Chesto Berry, Weakness Policy, Band, etc. So you can make Dondozo work. I'm kind of shocked actually to see that Band is 10% usage. Just fucking nuts. What kind of people are running Bandit Dondozo? What the fuck? I don't want to meet them. The point being, though, is that like you can make Dondozo work. It's just kind of a whatever mon. Well, it's kind of whatever mon compared to S's, but it still is really good. Just a lot of teams are countering it as all. Definitely S tier for sure. Palafin actually also can get an S tier. It's been a pretty decent option in this format. It's only going to continue to go up, truthfully, because this thing benefits a ton from the Ruin Cores, as it's one of the best GN PAL partners, in my opinion. But really, this thing is a great Jet Punch spammer. It's overall a really good late game option, because most teams can barely handle Palafin in the early game. Even if it's in zero form, it does a lot with Terra Water plus Mystic Water. But at the same time, though, in post form, this thing is, you're lucky to be only 2K'd by it. So we'll give this thing an S tier. Most teams do not like Haze Palafin, and it's been a really strong adaptation to the format. It's a lot better than the Bandit sets were, and truthfully, I think that's the missing link for why Palafin wasn't doing well before. Because most people thought, oh, let's run the funny Band option and the Bandit flip turn one. No, it fucking sucks as Band. Our Belief is a pretty cool option on Trickery Room. This thing gets a D tier for sure, though. It kind of needs Terra to be valuable, but stuff like Gleam actually is pretty good. Terra Rock as well is actually pretty good, as it helps with stuff like Torkoal and Roaring Moon matchups if it's Terra Flying. Overall, it's not a bad mon, it just is kind of outclassed, so we'll get this thing a D tier. Moving on, we do have the Belly Bolt. Now, Belly Bolt actually kind of impressed me in the later portions of the format. We saw this thing do pretty well at a couple of regionals. I'm going to give this thing a C tier, actually. I think that there might be something to this mon in the current formats. We've seen, for example, I think it was Perth regionals where this thing got, I want to say day 2, like 19th overall. No, actually, this thing did a little bit different. Maybe that was its day 2 result. Where the fuck is the Belly Bolt? I'm trying to find where this thing is. No, that was the wrong regional. Was it not? Oh, no, it was Bochum Regionals. Bochum Regionals was the one with Belly Bolt. But yeah, Bochum Regionals, this thing went 10-4, and it got 5th seed overall in day 1, 19th overall in the tournament. Ran an Assault Vest Terra Water set. It was pretty not bad. Definitely a mon to be keeping an eye out for. The Parabolic Charge plus the obviously Electromorphosis set is actually really obnoxious in Trick Room, and Weakness Policy, it's kind of a monster. We'll give this thing a C tier. Let's see, Mousehold. Mousehold's still really fucking good. It's one of the best support pieces. However, I think that really a lot of people kind of caught on the mouse at this point. However, that's not to say that it's a bad mon by any means. It still is incredible with friend guard support, partners well with stuff like Fluttermane, Dragonite, and Goldengo, and more than everything, Annihilate. It's really fucking terrifying. It's still one of the best support mons in the tier. I think that realistically, the 4 best support mons are definitely Indeedee, Amoonguss, Talonflame, and Mousehold. Gothitelle gets a clear 5th, but it is still objectively in that S tier. And then everything else is severely below. Overall, though, Mousehold is definitely an S tier for sure. Really threatening option, and a lot of teams do need to really keep an eye out for this mon for sure. We have Satitan. Satitan gets a D tier just solely because of the fact it's a Hail Sweeper, and it's probably like the best Hail Sweeper as far as Slush Rush goes, but it's just not a mandatory thing. You don't need Hail on a Bomb Snow, because a Bomb Snow can just go with fucking Bundle and just start breaking teams. That's really all it needs. Baxcalibur. I think I said the Baxcalibur was going to fall off. This ended up actually being very untrue. Baxcalibur is actually still a fucking great mon this format, and it still is truthfully an amazing fucking Terra option. It's pretty lethal, in fact, actually, and a lot of teams can still very much struggle to break this thing. It's probably one of the better A tiers, truthfully. You could maybe make a case for S, but I don't really think that that's the case right now. I think there's enough mons that can threaten it, at least into forcing it to Terra, and its Terra isn't helping it offensively. It just really is meant to try and kill because of the new defensive typing, which is fine. It's just that Terra doesn't make it newly threatening. It just, you need to predict around that Terra with open sheet, and it's a skill that you can definitely make work. Bax still has a lot of good Terra types though, with stuff like Steel, Poison, Water, Fire, etc. And it's overall just a really good pick. I just think that there's better mons in that S tier is all, but it's a pretty good mon in A tier. It's definitely one of the better things. We have Tatsugiri. Tatsugiri gets an S tier. I've already went over to Dondozo actually, and truthfully, I should have just put this up there right next to Dondozo, because it's really just here as the support piece to this. Both of these mons on their own would easily be pretty shit. This thing would probably be like an E tier on its own, and this thing would probably be like a C tier on its own. But together, they are S tier. We have Palmot. Palmot I gave a B tier at the beginning of the format, and I think I'm actually going to give this thing a B tier again. Palmot's still a pretty decent option for stuff like Revival Blessing plus Fake Out and Mach Punch. We've seen it do pretty well on teams such as Choppas, for example, at Orlando, and I think it's still a pretty good pick. I just think that there's a little bit better options as far as support goes, but the Fake Out plus Revival Blessing is actually kind of appreciated. Double Shock with Terra Electric also does a lot of damage, as we've seen through Choppas' team again, and it's a really nice offensive piece because there's not a lot of ground still. Easy B tier. Kilowattrel gets a D tier. This is solely because the fact that it's a really fast Tailwinder, and it's probably the fastest not priority Tailwind option. So we'll get this thing D tier off of that alone. We have, well, I guess besides Booster Moon. Booster Moon is the only thing that would outpace it as far as non-priority. Garganacl, I gave this thing an S tier last time, and I can't lie, I think that Garganacl still is going to get that S tier. It's overall still a pretty decent option. It's one of the best ways to make a team defensively viable, just because the fact that Salt Cure can be a really good means of getting around opponents, and stuff like Wide Guard, for example, is really valuable support. You still get Iron Defense sets, which are still kind of decent, but again, Wide Guard is just objectively better in a lot of cases. Overall, that pure rock typing is also not even that bad, because you can resist a lot of common stuff like, for example, Talonflame, Torkoal, etc. We'll give this thing an S tier for sure. It's still really fucking good. We have Glamora. I gave this thing a B tier last time. I'm going to give it an A tier this time, actually. Glamora is overall a pretty decent option. We see this thing partner really well in stuff like Emilio Forbes' Talonflame team that went undefeated until like top 8. We've seen this thing doing really well in Dozagiri builds. It's a really great way for Dozos to beat Dozo mirrors. And with Toxic Debris, it's a way to set up toxic spikes without having to actually click the move, which is something that stuff like Meowscarada, for example, cannot actually get the luxury of doing. So it has a pretty unique role in that regard. Definite A tier mon for sure, in my opinion. This is actually a pretty fucking good A tier mon at that. Grafai, this thing gets a D tier just solely off the fact that this thing can fucking enable the slacking with doodle bullshit. It's also got some okay support as well on top of that with stuff like Taunt, for example, and Parting Shot, but it still kind of sucks. Its typings, whatever, and its stats are definitely not great, barring that 110 speed. Goldengo. Goldengo is pretty fucking good. This is a definite S tier. It's a really good offensive piece. It's partnering well with stuff like Mousehold and Roaring Moon, and it's just a really good threatening mon. It's one of the best steals in the format. It's one of the best ghost types in the format. Really only stuff like Fluttermane is outclassing it. This thing definitely gets an S tier for sure, in my opinion. It's really fucking good. We're going to move on to Great Tusk. Great Tusk is actually going to be our very first S plus today. Great Tusk is a part of one of the best offensive cores. It is a really strong ground type and a really strong fighting type. It's one of the best offensive Terra mons, with stuff like Terra Ground being really fucking menacing. It is really like the go-to ground type on a lot of teams, which is sad because I still think Garchomp is really good, but I think Great Tusk definitely is just the best in a lot of cases. This thing is really hard to switch around. It's overall a really good threatening option with stuff like Life Orb, Bogus Sash, etc. You can make a lot of good defensive Terras as well as offensive ones work. Since we've already won over offensive though, stuff like Terra Steel and Fire are amazing defensively to handle fairies. Overall, really incredible pick. Benefits a ton from Sun being really good right now. Easy S plus for sure. Congratulations, Great Tusk. You were the first S plus today. Brute Bonnet. Brute Bonnet's pretty solid. I gave this thing an S tier last time. I do think I disagree with that a little bit though. We're going to actually give this thing an A tier. I think Amoonguss definitively outclasses this. However, that's not to say it's a bad pick. Overall, though, I think it's just a lot further of a gap than initially I thought, because I thought that Bonnet with loaded dice was a pretty good option, and it still is. I just think that Amoonguss is definitely a lot better of a catch-all in a lot of situations. And I think for what it's worth, this mostly comes to the fact that I'm also dropping Amoonguss to S tier, that I'm giving Bonnet the A tier. It's essentially just the same issues Amoonguss had, but it has a natural counterplay to Psy Spam. The thing is, though, is that you kind of need to clear terrain for this thing to get the Sucker Punches off. And if you don't clear terrain, then you kind of have to choose between either going for Crunch or for Sucker Punch, and either one has downsides in the moveset. Sucker Punch being worse for with terrain up, and obviously Crunch is really bad if your opponent doesn't bring terrain. So we'll give this thing an A tier. It's still not bad, just it's a lot outclassed is all. Sandy Shocks. Sandy Shocks is pretty fucking good. This thing has proven to be a really good offensive monster. I gave this thing an A tier last time, and honestly, I think I fucking agree. This thing is still a really good powerhouse. It's great with stuff like a Spather, for example, but it's also just a great mod in general. Sandy Shocks has a lot of good Terra types like Grass and Ice, for example, that can provide a lot of good offensive presence to opponents, handling a lot of bad matchups for it, like Great Tusk, for example, or Terra Dragon mons that would otherwise try and sponge the Thunderbolt and other electric moves. Overall, a definite A tier for sure. It's an incredible offensive monster, and with booster energy, this is a really strong special threat. Screamtail. I gave Screamtail an A tier last time, and I still stand by that. Screamtail is an amazing Perish Song mon. It's a really good bulky threat. It's one of the better defensive Paradox mons as far as Terra goes. You can go with stuff like Terra Water and Steel and be really valuable. Encore Disable as well as the Perish sets are really good. You can just go with like Thunder Ray support. Dual Screens even is not bad as far as manual screens go. But it's just kind of a fine mon. It's probably middle of the road as far as A tiers go, but it still is an incredible typing defensively, whereas Gardevoir having the same typing doesn't really work as well offensively, because the coverage is that unique besides the fact that Fairy handles Dark type for Psychic. This is definitely an A tier for sure. Fluttermane, objective S tier. This is the best mon in the format right now. I would argue it is the clear best mon. You could maybe make a case that Bundle at least rivals it, same as Iron Hands, but I would argue this is the best mon. I'm not going to order these S pluses though, because I didn't order any of the other tiers, and I truthfully cannot be bothered to go back and order tiers. That sounds fucking dumb with how many mons I'm doing. This is incredible. Easy best mon in the format. Ghost Fairy offensively is incredible. This thing has such a great speed tier at 135. Truly demanding offensive presence where you usually need to dual target it. Easy. Slitherwing gets a C tier. This thing is definitely one of the more underwhelming Paradox mons, but it still is pretty not bad. Overall, Slitherwing had some decent results on Rain in Moxie Boost's online tour. Slitherwing is doing okay otherwise, I guess, but it's just kind of a shit typing where you need to tear this thing or it's going to suck. First impression is decent, but Psy Spam being so high right now, as well as stuff like, for example, Fergraph being pretty valuable, means that you're not really consistently clicking it, but I will say as well that it's pretty decent. It's just a really strong offensive move against teams that aren't running one of those two things. And with Frigg's usage going down at least a bit, that's kind of helpful. Now with Terra Fire, it's really good at beating a lot of common resistances to bug and fighting. So we'll give this thing a C tier for sure. Roaring Moon. Roaring Moon can definitely get the S tier. This thing is actually fucking incredible. However, at the same time though, I think that a lot of the mons in the not S tier, well, in the S tier I should say, do outclass it. Personally, I'm of the mindset that Roaring Moon is probably one of the weakest S tiers besides like Garchomp and like Gastrodon, but it still is an objectively really justifiable pick. Stuff like Bulky Tailwind, Acrobatics Dragon Dance with Booster Energy, etc. all are pretty good options in this. Still can take advantage of items like Clear Amulet and be pretty threatening, but Roaring Moon definitely just isn't the mon that it was at the beginning of the format. I think a lot of people expected this thing to be the best Paradox mon, and I think that as the format's gone on, my stance of it being the 5th best at best case scenario has only been more and more solidified. I think Great Tusk objectively has always just been a better option. I felt that way ever since the first Orlando Regionals, truthfully. I'm pretty sure I even actually said it in that video that I thought that it was the 5th best, putting it kindly. and that I thought that bundle, Fluttermane, the Iron Hands, Fluttermane, Bundle, and Great Tusk in that order were all better than it. And I still stand by that. The order at the top 4 kind of changed, but I think that Roaring Moon is the definitive 5th best. But overall, though, it's not a bad mon. I just think that for the S tier, it's kind of one of the weaker ones. Definite S tier, though. Up next, Iron Treads. Iron Treads kind of fucking sucks. This thing gets the D tier, just because the fact that it can, technically speaking, have a pretty good offensive typing, with ground steel being okay, and the speed tier is pretty okay for it, but it's objectively like the worst Paradox mon. Iron Moth. Iron Moth is actually pretty terrifying, I can't lie. I gave this thing an A tier last time. I actually am going to give this thing an S tier. I think this thing is just a better version of Volcarona as far as that fast fire type goes. Speed tier at 110 is great, especially with booster energy as well as the speed boosting set to help try and support mons like Fluttermane really well with Acid Spray. This is a great way to at least pressure Dozo teams because you could drop their stats, which is the only way you could deal more damage boosting to them because you don't boost your own damage with stuff like Nasty Plot Calm Mind. So Moth actually proves to be pretty valuable in that regard. Definite S tier for sure. It's a really strong mon, and that typing plus stat line is really valuable here. Iron Hands, S+. One of the best options. It's literally like the fucking Incineroar of this format as far as versatility goes. Incredible Terra variety. It's great item variety with stuff like Safety Goggles, Citrus, Assault Vest, etc. It's quite literally just Incineroar. It's literally just Incineroar. Just look at its movesets compared to Incineroar. It has AV Pivot. It has Sword Dance Safety Goggles. It has Citrus Berry sets. It has literally everything Incineroar runs. Just, in fact, even its biggest bias is towards AV sets. It's the same as Incineroar. Like, come on, it's Incineroar. Jugulus gets a B tier. This thing is proven to be pretty good. It's a cool booster energy mon. It's a great offensive mon. Typing is still really good, with Dark Flying, of course, being decent offensively. It's a good manual tailwind option. Stuff like Snarl support is really valuable on this thing. Has some good offensive Terras with stuff like Terra Poison with Terra Blast, but it's objectively just a little bit outclassed by Hydreigon. Though the one benefit that this thing does have is 1, the booster energy, but 2, the naturally high speed stat, with 106 being actually pretty valuable. However, compared to a lot of other Paradox mons that run speed boosting sets, this is pretty slow actually. So we'll give this thing the B tier. Up next, we have Iron Thorns. Iron Thorns gets a C tier. This thing is kind of shit, but it's okay on Trick Room and other speed control based archetypes like that. Terra Bug Loaded Dice is still probably one of, if not the best sets you can run on it, but it's still kind of a whatever pick here. Definite C tier for sure though, just it's kind of a class is all. Iron Bundle. Iron Bundle is pretty amazing actually, easily one of the best mons in the format. Stuff like Icy Wind, Booster Energy, etc. This is still really fucking great. I think Booster Energy is the best set, but Focus Sash is also incredible for you, as you can essentially just try and use this thing as the fastest form of speed control in the format, outside of like a Talon Flame or a Murkrow Tailwind that has priority. But otherwise, it's like one of the fastest forms of speed control. The only other thing that outpaces is stuff like T-Wave Grim or like Scary Face or Thunderwave Scarf Electrode, and that's really about it. There's not a lot that outpaces it speed control wise. Also, stuff like Encore has been pretty good. On Hail, you can run Blizzard and start spamming through teams that way. It's just a really good offensive piece, and it's a really good support mon as well. Definite S+ for sure. Up next, Iron Valiant. I think I gave this thing a C tier last time. I'm gonna stand by that. I either give it C or B tier. I'm gonna give it C tier this time regardless though. It's just not that great. It's kind of a whatever mon as far as paradoxes go. I think a lot of people thought this thing would be better, self-included, just due to the typing as well as the fast speed stat and the mixed offenses, but Valiant doesn't really hold up. It's kind of okay as far as speed control goes with Icy Wind, and it has a unique ability to also throw on Wide Guard, which is something that Bundle cannot do. But at the same time though, just run Bundle and just put a lot of pressure on side spam with an offensive lead. Still not terrible, it's not great either. Tinkaton gets the D tier. It's definitely just kind of power crept in general, to be completely honest. Gigaton Hammer isn't that great right now, and the Fake Out Mold Breaker only goes so far because Frigg usage isn't as high as anymore, so you don't need the Mold Breaker Fake Out. Also, Fake Out in general just isn't as useful right now. It's probably one of the worst formats for it because really you're only running Iron Hands for it, and everything else kind of fucking sucks with Fake Out. Cloak being pretty popular as well hurt this thing's usage significantly, but at the very least though, it can pressure stuff like Cloak, Hatterene, and a lot of the other Cloak mons, at least pre-Terra. I'm trying to think of other Cloak options, and stuff like Gastron, for example, and you could at least maybe go for stuff like Knockoff into that, and that's pretty valuable. You can actually probably justify partnering this thing with a Garganacl and just start going for knockoffs plus Gigaton Hammers and doing a lot of damage. But overall, this thing is definitely a D tier mon for sure. Moving on, we have Armrouge. This thing definitely gets an S tier. Armrouge is a really good side spam option. It's one of the best psychic spam options, one of the best offensive trigger mons in the format. This thing also in general is just really hard to switch around. Expanding Force plus Armor Cannon is just really terrifying. It's a great Terra Blast mon too, but you don't typically need Terra Blast, whether it's Grass, Fighting, Dark, etc. The weakness policy set has been pretty good, but it's really just the best of one thing. You can't really make it work in tournament. Regardless, though, Armor's is definitely an S tier. Sarah Ledge, I put this thing in B tier last time, and I can't lie, I feel pretty confident in B tier again. It's a pretty good sword stance mon. I think this was kind of like one of my hot meta calls as well, where I said I thought that Sarah Ledge would do pretty good this format, at least at one point or another. And it did. It actually did top cut pretty well, if I remember correctly, at a couple tournaments. A bare minimum it made day 2 somewhere. I think that was at Knoxville, I want to say. Sarah Ledge. Sarah Ledge got 47th overall, and it also got 18th overall with the day 1 first seed, which is pretty good because that also happened with the fucking jump bluff, which is kind of fucking insane. That's, oh, never mind. This says jump bluff, but that was actually a Palmot. I don't know where the fuck the jump bluff came from, but it's kind of funny that it says that because that's a Palmot. Oh, you know what? No, because this actually doesn't even have the Sarah Ledge. So that team is just the wrong fucking team. I think it's the wrong team. No, I clicked the wrong team. Actually, that does have the jump bluff. My bad. Regardless, though, still a really cool option. Sarah Ledge still has a lot of good place in the format with stuff like Terra Steel, Grass, Dark, etc. It's really good just anti-Terra Mom thanks to Flash Fire. Definite B tier for sure. Up next, we have King Gambit. King Gambit's definitely an S tier. I think the format's fallen a little bit off of King Gambit. Stuff like Great Tusk being on the rise really fucking hurts this thing. But it still is a great Terra Blast option as well as a great Terra Flying Mon. Overall, Defiant is still a pretty good ability, and this thing has a pretty great way of just offensively pressuring cores like Arcanine, for example, with Amoonguss, or just really any other common balance core. It's a really great balance shredder, and that Dark typing is also really valued in a lot of different matchups here. It's a Dark type that doesn't just lose to Fluttermane, which is pretty cool. So yeah, we'll give this thing an S tier. Annihilate is actually Clodsire is up next. This thing probably should have just gotten dragged into E tier. It's just shitty Castrodon. But finally, we have Annihilate. Annihilate is pretty fucking good right now, I can't lie. Annihilate definitely benefits a lot from Scarf Found Gambit sets, but it's mostly used right now for bulk up. I think that I'm going to put this thing in the S tier for sure. This thing is an incredible pick for any given team. Realistically, with stuff like Mousehold and Annihilate, you can't really go wrong, but even still, it's a great offensive piece in general on your teams. And between the Defiant as well as stuff like the Terra Fire to avoid Will-O-Wisp or Terra Water just to help defensively, being a really good defensive typing. Terra Steel is really good for fairy matchups like Fluttermane. You have a lot of different options going for you. So overall, an app is definitely a great option for any given offense or really given balance because of the fact that Rage Fist is so fucking broken. So we'll give this thing the S tier. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the update of rankings. We'll link the tier list down below if anyone else wants to try. I think that my ratings in general have changed a lot over this format. I skewed a lot lower this time too after realizing that this format definitely, unlike Series 1, denies a lot of things being good, which it's definitely a little more impressive than Series 1, but it's not much more for what it's worth. And that's the kind of the thing is I think that the divide between usable and not usable is a lot more apparent. Essentially anything in the E tier and below I think is just pretty darn unusable unless you're really fucking dedicated. Actually, I'd argue D tier and below. However, I think the C tier and above actually all have really organic places in this metagame. Let me know what you guys think down below. And with that said, shoutouts to all of our channel members, of course, being Josh, aka Ultra Player, Mia, Zeke Zero, Matt O'Shea, Bbat, Anna Tupur, Timo Mueller, and Fonzie. Your guys' support on the channel is greatly appreciated. And if you want to become a channel member today, it's just going to be a couple $1 a month, and you get some bonus content. I'm delaying the members video because of Charlotte Regional, so it's actually going to go up on the Friday, literally like the 31st of the month. So we'll see you guys when that drops for as far as members go, but otherwise for anyone else, I'll see you guys in tomorrow's video. Until then, peace out, guys.